All right, what is going on, ladies and gentlemen? How is it going? I am Is There No One Else? And the video I'm bringing you today, we are going to talk about werewolves. Now, I asked you guys this question. I fielded a lot of stuff about werewolf, whether or not I should, release a werewolf build and all these other sorts of things. You guys overwhelmingly said, rip the band-aid off, talk about, the issues with different classes in PvP as you get to them. That's what I've always done on this channel. I am not going to post my werewolf build. I'm not going to, I'm going to be blunt. I'm going to be straightforward. Hopefully you guys understand where I'm coming from on this. I do not want to provide a cookie cutter blueprint for making a very oppressive XV1 group build, which is what werewolf really succeeds at. Werewolf, in my opinion, and I'm going to explain this in this video and I'm going to kind of show you this, and werewolf is very powerful in a group play situation because of the buffs and debuffs that it can provide to your group, and its biggest weakness is mitigated by being in a group. Werewolf solo, in my opinion, is one of the harder things I've ever played in this game. So you have these two things. You have this very polarizing class where it's very, very strong in one environment and it's not very good in the other environment. And so in this video, I'm going to talk about what the class is. I'm going to talk about its strengths and its weaknesses, and I'm going to kind of like round out the edges for the class. Now, I've done this in the past. I've talked about Magical Warden the same way, Magic and Necromancer, and basically I want to kind of call to light like what makes werewolf powerful, what in my opinion is too powerful for a werewolf and what needs to be toned back, and what is too weak for a werewolf and needs to be brought up. Now, these are just ideas, there's nothing concrete. It's just, kind of get the conversation rolling for you guys. I want to make this video as succinct as possible. So I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. I'm just going to talk to you guys. And, honestly, I'm just trying to explain from where I'm coming from. Okay. So I'm not going to be like, oh, well, maybe this, and this. It's like, no, this is just my opinion from my experience with it. And hopefully after I show you guys, where this class is powerful, you'll understand why I just don't want to provide a blueprint to allow people to, have the tankiest build in the game that also provides a lot of group debuffs that makes it very, very powerful and annoying in an XV1 situation. So there's a lot of builds that I don't post on my channel. If you guys go back and look, you're not going to see any snared in builds. I'm not running 50k health, snare support, Magical Warden builds because I don't think that they promote a fun PvP environment. And in that same way, there are certain ways you can build a werewolf that can make them very gross. They can make them very tough to deal with, in a group v group or in an outnumbered environment. And so I'm going to talk about that, and we're going to call to light. We're going to rip the band-aid off. We're going to talk about werewolf, and hopefully we can, see some changes that make it, like I said, round it out, make it a little bit weaker in this one environment and make it a lot stronger in another environment, because it is very polarizing, and in my opinion. So with that being said, guys, let's dive into it. Now, I'm not wearing a build. I'm not wearing a 5-piece sets or anything, but I do just want to talk about what werewolf is. Now, blunt and to the point, this was explained to me on one of my previous videos. Werewolf is not an ultimate. Werewolf is a subclass. When you go into werewolf form, you lose a lot of your passive abilities of whatever class you're on. Some of them cross over, some of them don't. You basically adopt werewolf passives. And so if you think about werewolf as a subclass, it makes a sense that a lot of these passives are actually quite strong, because you think, other classes, Necromancer, Nightblade, whatever, they have 3 different trees with a bunch of different passives in it. Werewolves have 4 passives, and they adopt a few. They adopt a few from the other classes, but overall they don't adopt quite a few passives from their class. And so that's what makes it kind of unique. And so when you see this and you're like, holy shit, that's OP, don't look at this as an ultimate for, a class. Look at it as like, hey, this is a subclass. Okay, it makes sense because they only have 4 of these. That's why they're a lot stronger. In the same vein, werewolves do not have a back bar. You only have 1 bar for werewolf. And so you have your gap closer, you have your fear, you have your heal, you have your dot, and you have your spammable. You don't have an execute, you don't have an ultimate you can cast, which makes it kind of difficult to kill some tankier individuals sometimes. And so you only have access to 5 abilities instead of 10 like most classes. And so for that reason, because you can't weapon swap, it makes sense that a lot of these abilities are a lot more powerful, because you got to stack, because you're only running 5 abilities. These abilities need to be stronger than what somebody else with 10 abilities would have. So I want to just call that to light. So when we're reading this and you're like, holy shit, that's OP, keep in mind that this is all, like, werewolves don't have a choice. These are the skills on your bar. You have morphs, that's it. You know, you don't have anything else. So those two things are very important to talk about when we're talking about werewolf. As far as, you know, the morphs, you have pack leader. Pack leader increases, you get 2 direwolves to fight by your side. You also get 10% damage mitigation. So this, both werewolves, you increase your stamina by 30%. This one gives you 10% damage mitigation while equipped. You get 15% stamina recovery. Werewolf Berserker, your light attacks provide a bleed, which is pretty nasty. Your heavy attacks deal damage in a cone in front of you. So your heavy attacks is an AoE cone that does 50% more damage. It's a decent dot. 30% more stamina, 15% more stamina recovery. So the difference between the two is 10% damage mitigation or a light attack bleed dot with an AoE cone for heavy attacks. So it's up to you on which one you want to run. Solo, I personally opt for the pack leader. I think pack leader just functions better in a solo environment. You're going to take a bunch of damage. And when I kind of explain what other negative effects werewolves have, you'll understand why I went pack leader. Berserker's better in a group play situation. You know, you don't really have access to an AoE damage dealing ability outside of your dot, so having AoE heavy attacks provide that conal damage is actually quite effective. Plus you have light attack dots. Werewolf Berserker is a lot more effective in a group play situation, in my opinion. Pounce, you have brutal pounce. Yeah, this is just an execute dot, you know. It also does damage to nearby enemies. So it also increases your weapon damage every time you apply to an enemy. So if you pounce into an area and you pounce into the area again, like 6 seconds later, you gain up to what is it? 85 weapon damage. It's okay. Feral pounce increases the duration. This is just your gap closer. So you get an execute dot. You know, as long as they're below 100% health, this damage over time effect is going to scale up to 450% more. This one gives you stamina recovery and increases your werewolf duration. This one gives you the AoE damage plus, you know, 450% more damage plus the weapon damage. So it's what you want. I've been opting for Feral Pounce because I want to stay in werewolf for longer, but up to you. Hircine's Bounty is the heal. Now, this isn't just about werewolves, guys. I've talked about this on other videos. I think health-based heals are one of the biggest problems in the game right now, as far as issues in the game. Anytime you have a very good health-based heal, it can create a lot of imbalance due to how powerful proc sets are. Like, one of the downsides to proc sets is that your healing isn't as good, because most of your heals scale off your max magicka and your spell damage, or your max stamina and your weapon damage. And because you have a health-based heal, that means you can run procs without any repercussions. And so health-based heals means the more health you have, the better your healing is. Now, I get anywhere from 10 to 18k burst heals with my specific build because I'm running a lot of health. It just scales and it allows me to heal for a big amount. And I found that to be very effective with some of the shortcomings that a werewolf has. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about the heals. And before you comment on any of this, I know I'm going to upset some people in one way or another. Listen to the whole thing before you comment, because the heal is powerful and it's weak at the same time. It really kind of depends on what environment you're in. So I'm going to kind of explain that. Where it's really weak, it costs 5392 magicka. Keep in mind, like, your damage on a werewolf scales off your max stamina and your weapon damage, right? So you want to stack your weapon damage and you want to deal damage and you want to hit harder. As a stamina class, you can't spam a 5392 magicka heal. You know, you only have so many heals in a character before all of a sudden that really starts to add up and you just can't heal anymore. And so oftentimes when you go look at my fights where I'm playing on my werewolf, there are times where I take a bunch of damage and I get caught with like a couple fat snipes or an in-cap from stealth, and I'm like spamming heals, and all of a sudden I'm out. If I take one more like nasty burst damage thing, I'm dead. And so in a solo environment, this is the toughest thing to build around on a werewolf. 5392 magicka for a heal is very tough. This is what makes werewolf actually very, very weak, because of the cost of the magicka for your heal. So yes, I was just talking about health-based heals and how they're extremely powerful, but at the same time, when you're playing solo as a werewolf, you only have so many. I can only cast 3 of these before I'm out of magicka. You know, I can only cast 3. And so anytime I'm in a longer duration fight, you're going to see my magicka just drop to 0. You know, if you will go back and watch any of those fights, my magicka drops to 0. You really need to stack magicka recovery on a solo build, which really impacts your overall damage on a stamina-based werewolf for damage. And so that's what makes it very weird. And so when you look at this specific morph, Hircine's Rage, if cast at full health, gain Major Berserk. So when you cast this ability at full health, you gain Major Berserk, you do 25% more damage. That's a lot, guys. Everybody looks at this, they know Major Berserk, that's a lot of damage. Holy shit, Werewolf is OP. But if you're playing Werewolf solo, you're not going to run this, because you're never going to willingly cast a 5392 magicka heal when you're at full health to get 25% more damage. You need all the heals you can get when you're playing solo, when you're fighting outnumbered. And so this skill, although it is powerful on paper, although it looks really good, this skill is more effective in a group play situation. If you're running with a dedicated healer and the healer can, you know, offset your healing by being a healer, you can then use your magicka pool to use this ability instead, and you get 25% more damage. And so this is part of the reason why, in my opinion, Werewolf is better in a group play environment, because their biggest weakness is this heal. Like when you're playing solo, the biggest weakness on a werewolf is their ability to heal themselves. When you're in a group and you have multiple heal over times on you and all these other things, and if you're running with a good healer, you can kind of forego that. You can forego magicka recovery. You can use your magicka to boost your damage by 25%, and you can hit harder. So instead of like doing this offset thing where you're like, oh shit, you know, I have to sacrifice a lot of weapon damage to build in mag recovery on a solo werewolf, you're just like, you know what? I'm going to put on 2 damage sets. You know, my werewolf build, I'm wearing a recovery set. You know, I need magicka recovery. If you're running in a group, you don't have to do that. You know, you can just run 2 damage sets. You can hit harder. You can make this 25% scale more. Obviously, you have to run with a good healer. Obviously, you have to be group comp. But this sort of thing is only effective in a group play environment. So this buff, although it's very powerful, Major Berserk on demand when you're at full health for 6 seconds, that's a very powerful buff. You're only ever going to get that buff if you're running with a good healer. If you're running solo, you're not going to use this. You're going to use Hircine's Fortitude. This increases your healing done and increase your health and stamina recovery by a small amount. So the more the more you heal for, the better the recovery is. It also gives you, this heal also gives you Major Brutality, which is also nice. So yeah, when I'm solo, I run Hircine's Fortitude because I just do not have the magicka. Like most magicka classes do not have the magicka sustain to cast 5392 magicka heals. And so when we talk about werewolf heals, and this is going to be an interesting conversation that we can have, you know, in the chat below, and this is what I want to talk to you guys about, because I don't have all the answers, guys. You know, this is why I want to talk about this and have this conversation with you guys. Is this skill is very polarizing. You know, and polarizing meaning it's very good in one environment, it's very bad in another. What can be done to round this out and make it better solo? What can you do to make it better solo so that you can play werewolf in a solo, small scale environment without a dedicated healer, without being as crazy oppressive in a group play situation? That's the question I'm going to pose to you guys, because I'm going to kind of provide my thoughts at the end, but just something to think about, I guess, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because yeah, it's not too often when you're looking at a skill where you're like, wow, that's really good, and it's really bad at the same time. That's what this is. Health-based heals, I think, are problematic. 5392 health-based heal solo, and it's rough. It's pretty rough. Roar, this is your CC. This one increases the damage of your heavy attacks if you're running the Berserker. This makes a lot of sense. You know, you can fear people. This one also sets people off balance. So anybody you fear, it sets them off balance for 7 seconds. You guys all know off balance. 10% more damage in burst combinations. So werewolves have an access to an AoE CC that also provides AoE off balance to everybody in the group. A very, very nice buff in group play situations. Heavy attacks are also 33% faster. Okay, whatever. While slotted, you gain major savagery, increasing your weapon critical rating by 2191. Okay, not super great, but the AoE off balance is nice. Then you have deafening roar. This one's interesting too. So you set them off balance with this. Your roar also leaves enemies dazed, applying major fracture and minor maim. So you, with this one, you set them off balance, you know, AoE off balance. You also have AoE major fracture. You also have AoE minor maim. So when you're talking about group play support and abilities that you can provide to your group, this is very effective. Like if you're running with other stamina-based DDs, you know, Stamdens, Stamina Necromancers, you know, obviously Stamdens also have major fracture, but you can fear them and you can get this major fracture before the sub-assault goes off, and you can kind of ensure all the damage goes in. I mean, you're overlapping that buff a little bit, but AoE minor maim is also very nice. You know, if you're not running with a Stamden, it's just, you're stacking all these buffs, which is quite nice. You also, you know, reduce their physical resistance by 5280. This one, you gain major savagery, increasing your weapon critical by 2191 once again. So yeah, major fracture and minor maim versus increasing the speed of your heavy attack. So between the two, this kind of comes down to what morph of the werewolf you're choosing. You know, if you're going berserker, ferocious roar might be kind of appealing. I think deafening is just a little bit better personally, but you know, I think you can see the appeal for either one. Piercing howl, this is our spammable. The one grants allies a synergy that grants them empower. And then you have Howl of Agony. Howl of Agony does a ton of damage. Enemies who are feared or facing you take 22% more damage from this attack. So when you're looking at a werewolf, you know, you get 22% more damage here, which seems like a lot. But like I said, when you're playing solo, you really have to build in a ton of mag recovery. And so you have to build in a ton of mag recovery in order to survive, in order to cast your heals. And so you have to build your character in a very unique way, and you sacrifice a lot of damage. This 22% looks, it is a big scaling amount. It is a lot. Like 22% is a pretty big buff. It's not a major buff. It stacks with other abilities, you know, other things like Major Berserk, like Malakath, stuff like that. But if you're not running a ton of damage, this 22% isn't going to scale a lot. And so when you're playing solo, it's like, okay, well, this just makes this ability viable. You know, this just makes my spammable hit a decent amount. That's basically how it functions when you're playing solo as a werewolf. When you're playing in a group situation and you don't need that mag recovery and you can stack more damage, this 22% is going to carry a lot harder and you're going to hit a lot harder. And so once again, this is one of those things where in a group play environment, werewolf has a lot of things like if you can shore up that weakness, which is their healing, you can stack a ton of damage and they can be very, very brutal in a single target aspect, in a, you know, providing group buffs and debuffs, minor maim, major fracture, all these other sorts of things. It makes them very powerful. And then finally, we have Infectious Claws, which is, you know, yeah, we have Claws of Anguish, we have Claws of Life. Claws of Anguish is Major Defile. So you cast this on people, it's a cone in front of you. Everybody in front of you gets Major Defile. It also inflicts the disease status effect, which is Minor Defile. So you have AoE, Major, and Minor Defile on this ability, which obviously, once again, it's very effective. So when you're talking about a werewolf in a group play situation, you have Major and Minor Defile, you have Major Fracture, you have Minor Maim. You know, you can potentially supplement your damage by 25%. You have, you know, you have all these different abilities that stack very well, and it makes you very, very tough, very effective in a group play environment. Claws of Life, damage over time heals you for its damage caused. It's okay. You know, when you're severely outnumbered, having that extra healing coming in is nice, but if you really want to ensure kills, Claws of Anguish is the better skill, in my opinion. But yeah, that's the abilities. And so I've talked about this before and I've gone through these, but now after having tested them, I want to kind of provide my overall thoughts and kind of sum things up for you guys here. When you're looking at Werewolf and you're looking at playing it solo and you see all these buffs, once again, the 5392 Magicka cost holds Werewolf back solo. It makes it very tough to play a Werewolf in a solo environment. However, like I said, if you can supplement that healing, you can make the tankiest, highest health, one of the hardest hitting things in the game that also just provides, you know, oppressive bleeds, major and minor defile, and all these other sorts of things. And so that's why I'm not going to post a build. That's why I'm not going to post this, because in one environment, in my opinion, werewolf is very, very, very powerful. Like I'm just going to kind of show you. If you go pack leader, 10% damage mitigation. Okay. You get 10,000 resistances passively. Keep in mind, they don't have a major armor buff. So 5280, that's just a major armor buff. So it's like 4,800. They get 4,800 on top of essentially what another class would get. Okay. So it's a little bit more than like a Nord passively. So when you go into werewolf, you get these extra resistances, but they don't have a major armor buff. So this kind of offsets that armor buff, but you get that 10% damage mitigation plus that armor, the built-in armor on the character. On top of that, you also have, with your fear, you have AoE minor maim. So you have minor maim, 10% damage mitigation, and buffed resistances. And so it makes you very, very tanky. On top of that, because werewolf has a health-based heal that has no like cap on how much, like the more health you have, the more healing you're going to have. It behooves you to run higher health on a werewolf because your healing is going to be better when you do it. And so you see me on my build, I'm running 35k plus health so that I can get 10 to 17,000 heals. So you build this, you have this class that has all this damage mitigation, and then you stack all of this health on it, and then you provide a health-based heal. It makes it very oppressive, in a group play environment. Like you're going to go onto the battlefield, you're essentially going to be a necromancer as far as like your tankiness. In my opinion, you're as tanky or tankier than a lot of necromancers with what werewolf has passively, with what they have in their kit if you build it properly. That's what makes werewolf very strong. That sort of combination in a group play environment is very powerful. When you play it solo, it is not powerful. All that strength goes completely out the window, because it's not easy. Because once again, this ability costs 5392 magicka. It is a lot to sustain. All you werewolves that have tried to play solo, you're just nodding your head. You're like, yep. And so what I would like to see from werewolf, in my opinion, is I would like to see the heal change in what it does. I would get rid of the one morph. I don't think you need 25% more damage. I would get rid of the major berserk buff. That's just my opinion. I would change this to something else. I know that's very generic. It's easy for me to say because I'm not a game developer. Make it something else. I would make it something else. I would reduce the amount of magicka this costs. I'd either convert this to a stamina based ability and allow werewolves to scale in weapon damage and damage more easily, and then also use their stamina to heal like other stamina based classes. Werewolves deal damage with stamina and weapon damage. It doesn't make a ton of sense that their heal is magicka. This is the biggest thing that's holding them back. But if you're going to reduce the cost of magicka or convert it to stamina, you have to be a little careful with Hircine's Rage, because you don't want to, once again, like it's going to be very, very, like we're talking like 25k plus Howl of Agonies if all of a sudden you can stack 2 weapon damage sets with, a stamina based heal and all, like that could be very, very nasty. So I would bring it back in both those ways. If you get rid of the major berserk, so that it doesn't have it, in a group play situation, werewolf isn't as powerful. It's still going to be powerful. It's still going to be super tanky. It's just not going to have potentially access to that 25% buff. Reducing the overall cost of the magicka heal allows solo small scale werewolves that are not running with a healer to be able to use this heal more successfully. Like classes should be able to heal, dropping it to 4,000 magicka, 3,500 magicka, or converting it to stamina would make a lot of sense, in my opinion. Doing those sorts of things, getting rid of the health-based aspect of it so that you're not stacking a health-based heal, make it stack into, your heal based off your weapon and spell damage, your weapon damage and your max stamina. And yeah, I think in that way you can kind of scale it a little bit better and, allow it to be easier to build into in a solo small scale environment. So basically what I'm trying to say is if you play solo in a small scale environment without a healer, I would make buffs to make that it better in that environment, while also eliminating its top end cap in a group play situation. So that's the first thing I would do. I think all health based heals need to be capped. Their effectiveness needs to be capped at like 35k health. Health based heals are ridiculous because of how they scaled proc sets. I talked about it in other videos in the past. Health based heals are one of the biggest issues in this game, and yeah, werewolves have a health-based heal. You know, this isn't me attempting to go after werewolf and say like, hey, nerf this to shit or anything like that. I'm saying just make it function the way other heals do. You know, health-based heals function very nastily with proc sets. It allows you to have high healing with crazy proc damage. Makes it very effective. As far as the other buffs go, 22%, you know, if you're able to scale a little bit more into max damage, you know, maybe you reduce the piercing howl down to like 10% more damage for them facing you. You're still going to have like a ton of damage because you're going to scale into it better. You just reduce that 10% to maybe 20%. And so these thoughts, this would all just kind of depends on how you build it. You know, how you attack the heal kind of depends on, you know, what you do with piercing howl. So I'm not saying this is what you do exactly. It really depends. You know, it's one of those flexible types of things. In the same vein, and I talked about this on Necromancer, and so I'm not switching anything like that. I don't mind that Claws of Anguish has Major Defile on it. Major Defile for 2 seconds, it's fine. It's just when abilities have the ability, when abilities have major and minor buffs on them, I think that's when it becomes problematic. And so what I would do is I would get rid of the disease status effect on this ability. I would just say, hey, you know, you get Major Defile, maybe up it to 3 seconds, you know, up it to 3 seconds so that you have it and it does this amount of damage, and then you have that Defile, and then you just get rid of the disease status effect. And the same thing with Necromancers, you know, Blast Bones does a ton of damage, it's Major Defile, and it also is a disease ability which can proc the disease status effect. It is a very, like, we all know what Blast Bones is. These are my same thoughts on Blast Bones. If you disagree with me, that's fine. You probably disagree with my thoughts on Necromancer. I'm just not changing my thoughts on that. I don't think a major and minor buff, major and minor debuff are good on one specific ability. Even though werewolves only have 5 skills, I think this is a lot for one skill. I would just get rid of that, maybe up the damage a little bit, maybe up the duration of the Major Defile a little bit, and that's basically what I would do. But overall, werewolf is a lot of fun. You know, it's a lot of fun. It's very unique. It's very tough to play in a solo environment. You have to build it in a very specific way. But a lot of their abilities work very well for large groups running down smaller groups. And the gist of, you know, me talking about this is to give you guys ideas. You know, guys, like, as you guys know, I've created 2 different series on how to create builds, how to make your own build, how to go about these sorts of things. I have already given you guys the tools on my channel to go out and make your own build. Okay, so if you watch my channel and you watch it quite a bit, you already know how to do these things. I just don't want to provide a blueprint for builds that are very, very nasty and oppressive in an outnumbered situation. You know, when you're 10v5ing a group, or you're 25v4ing a group, you know, you don't have to worry about healing that much on a werewolf. You can just stack into damage, and you can just provide major and minor defile, major fracture, minor maim to the group. You provide all these buffs, and then you're also one of the tankiest things on the battlefield. And if you do take some bursts, then you have a health-based heal that can pop you back to full really quickly. It's very, very rough. It's a very polarizing thing. And so I hope you guys understand where I'm coming from. Hopefully this video, it kind of gives you ideas. If you guys want to run a werewolf, you know, like, this is my other thought. I'm sorry. It is not our jobs as players to balance the game. Okay. If you want to run a werewolf because you think a werewolf is fun, run a werewolf. Okay. I just don't want to post you exactly how I go about building mine. I've given you some thoughts on this video. I have some gameplay with a werewolf. You can kind of look at those things. I streamed it on my Twitch stream. We have an entire Discord channel where people talk about werewolf builds. There's all these different things for you guys to go out and do your own thing for werewolves. I just don't want to provide the mold and, you know, all of a sudden I'm getting run down by 30 werewolves. That's just not, it's not fun for me. That's going to be my little selfish part. I don't want to get run down. At the same time, I don't think, you know, people want to go back to a tanky meta, you know. I do think necromancers need to be looked at a little bit with their damage mitigation. I think that needs to get toned back a little bit. And if you're going to look at that for necromancers, you need to look at that for werewolves as well. You know, werewolves in that same vein are also very tanky. I know I keep talking about this stuff, but it's just, werewolf is very strong in a group. It's not very strong solo, in my opinion. And so those are the things that I would do to kind of round it out, make it better in a solo small scale environment, make it a little bit less oppressive in a group play environment. It would still be effective overall, guys. You know, like a lot of the changes that I've talked about, you know, I'm talking about changing the heal to stamina morph, having it scale off your weapon damage and whatever. You're still going to hit hard. You're going to be able to sustain it a lot easier. It's still going to make werewolf very effective, and it's going to make it hit harder than what I'm talking about right now. But it'll hit harder for solo and small scale players as well as group players, and you won't have buffs that only work in a group play environment. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, that's gonna be the end of this video. If you guys have any questions or comments, as always, please provide in the section below. I'll do my best to answer it. Obviously, you know, this is just an open-ended thing, you know, just talking about the class, kind of talking about its strengths and its weaknesses from my experience and what I would do in general. So I'm going to leave that where it is. Thank you for watching, guys. Have a nice day.